TFD Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Sullivan, and this is the show where we break down popular science into easily digestible and actionable information to give you the blueprint to be a high performer in your life. Today, I'm joined by TFD Performance Dietitian Ryan Hassel, and we are talking about seed oils. We discuss why they are held in such unfavorable light, the truth behind the claims against them, and what the totality of the evidence really says about them. We finish with a discussion on why social media personalities get a lot of traction in the nutrition space and why they need seed oils more than seed oils need them. Let's get to it. Welcome to another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. I'm joined by TFD Performance Dietitian, Mr. Ryan, the Dojo Hassel. Dojo.
Hey, Jordy. How you going?
Yeah, good. Good as your mustache, as good as your mullet. So happy Friday. Really good episode today. Something that we've been getting blasted on in our Q&As. Every week I get at least 10, 15 questions. What are your thoughts on seed oils? What are your thoughts on seed oils? Can you break down seed oils? What's the go with this? And that's exactly what we're going to do today. Dojo has been busy digging into the research and going really deep to find, okay, well, what is the answer to this? And like good scientists, we're not just immediately going to dismiss it and we'll talk about it in its entirety. But really what Dojo was doing was trying to find some answers and reasons. Okay, well, why could they be bad? Well, let's look at what the research says, and maybe seed oils are bad. And it's something we've just entirely missed and it's just been brought to light. But we're going to talk about that. Let's dive straight into it because we don't want to waste time. It's a really interesting episode. Let's start off straight off the bat. Just make us all aware, Dojo, for people listening, if they don't understand what seed oils are, explain what they are to us.
All right. So seed oils, it's kind of like a newer way of just saying vegetable oils. So these are oils that we've all used like for our whole lives. It's not like a new product that's come onto the market or anything, but it's basically just a name that's been given to plant oils that come from seeds. So if you think of like your canola oils, like safflower oils, things like soy oils, soybean oils, all of those types of oils are technically derived from seeds. So they're like, from a scientific point of view, if you really want to like get into the weeds of it, they're technically not vegetable oils, even though those are like plants. They're considered seed oils. So like that's kind of like the main distinction here is that's what we're talking about. So these oils that come from seeds. Now, a lot of the thing that's been kicked up, like a lot of the noise has been kicked up around seed oils and calling them bad for us is because these types of oils, because they come from seeds, like it's I don't want to say it's a new process, but like it's not technically a natural process. So you don't find seed oils when you're in nature. Like you wouldn't like squeeze out some seed and then like a bit of oil comes out. Like it takes a lot of seeds all like refined together to make a small amount of these seed oils. And so what happens is a lot of the time these seed oils are kind of a byproduct of the production of something else. So one example that gets used a lot is the production of wine from grapes, and then the seeds are kind of like a waste product. They get taken, and instead of throwing them out and wasting them, they then get used to make something else that they can sell, which they turn into grapeseed oil. But I guess it's what'll be important to kind of like unpack here now that we understand what seed oils are. What are some of the claims that are getting tossed at seed oils? They've been labeled a lot by different people, both on social media and sometimes in science as well as being like unhealthy. So let's take a look at that. What sort of health claims have you heard being thrown around so far about seed oils, Jordy?
Yeah, I guess they're all negative, right? And I think if anyone is an avid user of social media, you would have heard some pretty influential figures talking about it and how seed oils is basically the root cause of all illness in the human society these days. So everything, right? Like I've heard everything from the reason that we're overweight and obese is because of seed oils. The underlying reason for a lot of chronic disease is because of the overconsumption of seed oils. The reasons that we are so lethargic and we have no energy throughout the day is because we consume too many seed oils, and it affects so many different bodily systems in a negative way. So let's unpack it. Dojo. Let's first go, what are the claims for, seed oils being bad? And then let's have a look. What does the evidence actually say? Because it's important to remember we need to look at the evidence when we're talking about these things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So as you said, like literally basically any chronic health condition that exists at the moment has some sort of like has been blamed or has been linked to seed oils. And I don't mean that as like scientifically linked, but there's just people that are drawing connections here. So anything from like heart disease, like mental stuff, things like inflammation, autoimmune diseases, things like asthma. People are saying that this is why allergies are developing more and more is because of seed oils. So to kind of understand the thinking here, we're to kind of like separate out like where are these claims coming from? How are they linking these things to seed oils? And then let's take a look at what actually is like kind of real here. So there's a couple of main points that get thrown around and that get used to link seed oils to all of these health conditions. One of the main ones here is something that we call omega-6 fatty acids, or omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids. It's a bit of like a long name, but essentially what that is a type of fat. I guess it probably helps to explain like what the different types of fats are. I'm pretty sure we've done a podcast on fat, so maybe go back and listen to that if you're not exactly sure on the terms here. I might just gloss over that so we're not getting too dug into the different types of fats, but we have three main types of fats, saturated, and then we've got unsaturated, which can be broken down into two more, which is our like omega-6 and omega-3s. So that's kind of like a nutshell. Well, there's like trans fats as well. We'll get to that. So these omega-6s are a type of unsaturated fatty acid. Now, in the past, there's been some studies, and it's not something that we fully understand yet, but there's some studies that suggest that omega-6 fatty acids might be linked with increased inflammation. They're involved in some of the inflammatory pathways in the body. Now, inflammation is another thing that's associated as being bad. It's a natural process. We need inflammation for certain things. But what kind of gets thrown around here is we have the omega-6s, which are these sort of like, you could call them, I guess, like pro-inflammation fatty acids. And then our omega-3s, which you hear about a lot, like fish oils, the type of ones that you supplement for reducing inflammation, joint health, that kind of thing. These are another type of polyunsaturated fatty acids. Now, in seed oils, we find a lot more of the omega-6 fatty acids. And so one of the claims that gets thrown around is that by having a lot of seed oils in your diet, you're kind of throwing this balance out of whack, and you're having more of the pro-inflammatory ones and less of the anti-inflammatory ones. And that's leading to a lot of these like autoimmune conditions, inflammation things, and like a lot of chronic health conditions. And so the people that are kind of like making these links, a lot of them, unfortunately, this is like, and we'll get to chatting about this in a second, but if you take a look at the people that are like drawing these connections, a lot of them come from the perspective of unsaturated fats are less healthy. We need to have more saturated fats in our diet. Therefore, we should be having more animal fat sources. So you hear this omega-6 argument a lot from especially people that are big in like the carnivore meat diet space. So far, everything that I've been able to find in terms of like the overarching like scientific consensus here is that, and there's been like a really recent meta-analysis study, which I don't know if you guys listening in aren't too sure about the different types of studies. A meta-analysis of like randomized control trials is basically the gold standard. Like it's basically the highest level of evidence that you can get on a particular topic. They will look at like hundreds of other individual studies and kind of summarize, okay, what is the general consensus of what these studies have found. So they had a really recent one of these done not too long ago that looked at the effects of these omega-6 fatty acids on health outcomes. And they basically found that there's no real evidence for omega-6s, even if they're consumed in like high amounts. There's no real connection there between omega-6s in the diet and these adverse health outcomes. So in most cases, it's still generally going to be better to have more omega-6s in your diet, or to include them in your diet in the place of these saturated fats that come from animal products, which is kind of the opposite of what the carnivore people would want you to hear, because they want you to think, okay, omega-6s are bad, we need to get rid of seed oils, we need to replace them with animal fats. And the opposite is actually true in this case. Omega-6s are probably still going to be healthier for you than having or like cooking things in like animal fats and all of that kind of thing. So that's kind of like the first argument here is those omega-6s. Did you have anything like any takes on that one, Geordie?
Yeah, I can completely understand where they come from, right? Even when I went through university, I remember learning even epidemiological studies that showed that we were consuming too much omega-6, and the ratio, the supposed golden ratio that we used to think was a thing between omega-3s and omega-6 consumption was completely out of whack. And we got taught about that. That may be a contributing factor. But like Dojo said, a lot of this is coming from people who are in a particular mindset or a part of a particular movement. And just being a part of that, you need to appreciate that there's going to be a degree of bias. And something we're going to talk about a little bit more once we get on and we talk about, you know, the other evidence on the other side of the coin for omega-6s is it's important to realize that human physiology is extremely complicated. Even when we talk about fatty acid metabolism, like we're talking about it in such a simple form, right? Like we're talking about it in terms of unsaturated fats, saturated fats. We're not even really breaking it down into monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, going through all the different types, omega-3s, omega-6s, omega-9s. We're not going through all of that. All of them will play a role in fatty acid metabolism. And we're still not to a point where we completely, entirely understand in its entirety, in the whole picture of human metabolism, how each one of these fats contribute. So what we have to do is we have to look at the evidence, and we look at these papers, and we look at these correlations, and we have to make our best assumption. And I think from the totality of evidence, when we look at it, what's going against omega-6s, or when we're trying to find links, okay, if increased omega-6 is bad, what's the evidence for that, and what are the links? We generally don't tend to find it when you look at really good, like Dojo said, randomized controlled trials. You look at meta-analysis of big groups of these randomized controlled trials. Even though there's a lot still to be learned about fatty acid metabolism, from the evidence we still have, we just don't tend to see that these omega-6s or these seed oils are linked with all these adverse health effects that all these social media people are claiming.
Yeah, and I'll comment on the levels of evidence and stuff in a second, but I just want to go over there's probably two other main health claims or like kind of I guess red flags that people would point to in terms of linking these seed oils to negative health outcomes. So let's unpack those a little bit. The first one is trans fats, and then the second one is like the processes involved with actually making the seed oil. So actually, we'll go over the process of making the seed oils first, because that's probably one of the first ones that pops up in terms of people will say that seed oils are unnatural. And I kind of hinted at that at the start of this when I was saying that it takes a lot of seeds just to make a little bit of seed oil. There's a lot of processing that goes into that in order to take all those seeds and generate that small amount of seed oil. In a lot of cases with these seed oils, they tend to be, as I said before, they used to be in a lot of processes like a waste product that was just thrown out. Now they've come up with ways to process them a little bit more, clean them up, maybe take some different tastes or flavors out of them to make them more, I guess, like palatable. And then you're able to use them in more applications. So you're able to fry with them, you're able to add them to salads and stuff, and you're not going to have these like weird tastes or whatever that like people probably just wouldn't buy. So there's a couple of different processes going in. And in order to do that, like a lot of food processing involves using chemicals to take things out or add things in. And in most cases, and like this is regulated pretty well in like a lot of countries, a lot of these chemicals that are used in order to like extract certain parts of the molecules out or add things in order to like make the fats like cleaner or take smells out or take flavors out. A lot of these chemicals they're used, but then they're removed like pretty well from these products. So there's like they're not just like putting chemicals in and then that's it, like, and you're getting some little toxic slurry of like fat and bleach or something on your plate. Like they take a lot of it out. But there is like always the argument that like people in these sort of industries have been known to cut corners before. So to try and make the claim that like, okay, they're taking everything out, it's all going to be perfect, you can't really say that. So there is a chance that these processes are going to be leaving behind trace amounts of chemicals, whether or not they're potentially hazardous. So like that is actually a pretty decent argument for why, or maybe against like seed oils. But that's also true for basically every other processed food that we eat. So just labeling that as something that exists only in seed oils is pretty inaccurate. Any sort of food that you buy off the shelf that hasn't just gotten picked out of the farm and put into like the fresh produce section is going to go through some sort of processing and potentially contain some of these products. Even the foods that we get in the fresh produce section, right? Like they unless they're like organic, they're going to be having some level of maybe like pesticides or some sort of chemicals there. Like basically everything in this day and age that we eat is going to have some level of like, whether or not it's like plastics or chemicals, like this stuff, it can get pretty scary when you start to think about what actually goes on behind the scenes of food processing. But this point is basically just to say, like, it's not exclusive just to seed oils that this stuff happens. It's across the board for all foods, and probably needs to be tightened up and regulated more, like across the board, not just in seed oils. And then the last one, just to kind of like briefly go over, is trans fats. There's not much to talk about here other than that the claim is that like in these processes that lead to the production of these seed oils, you get some level of trans fat production. And that's a pretty strong argument. Like trans fats are really bad. They've been linked to all sorts of cardiovascular diseases, all sorts of health diseases, or like negative health outcomes, chronic diseases. The problem here is that the people that kind of lean into this argument that seed oils are bad, they have trans fats, blah, blah, blah. They're usually people from like the carnivore space. Again, unfortunately, it's kind of like one group that seems to be really going hard against the seed oils. So it's kind of just good to identify where this is coming from. But they'll say things like, okay, seed oils have high trans fats. No amount of trans fats are safe. Like we shouldn't be having these foods. Like they're an evil food. They shouldn't be on the market. The problem here is like, while there is some level of trans fats, a lot of the time what they don't talk about is how low the amount of trans fats are. And then maybe like comparison between different foods here, right? So if we look at how much trans fat is actually produced in these seed oils, I think what I found was like it can be as low as like 2% of the fat content of these oils can be trans fats, which in most cases, in most like developed countries, that's considered to be so low that they don't even have to label it on the package, because it's not considered to be like high enough to have any sort of impact, right? Now, if we look at the other side, okay, the carnivore people are kind of the ones pointing fingers about this, but when we look at meat and like animal fats, and like I guess particularly like red meat, I guess is a good example of that. Trans fats, while they occur synthetically in like food production and they come out in seed oils, they also occur naturally through the process of rumination, which is like a whole other thing. But that's basically the process of how things like animals like cows and other animals that eat grass and they digest it, they go through this process called rumination. And that actually produces trans fats as well. And those trans fats end up in the fat in the meat that you're eating. And meat trans fat content can be like I was looking into the numbers on this, and it's almost identical to that you would find in like seed oils. So it's around somewhere like 2 to 3%. So it's going to be, if not the same, maybe even a little bit more trans fat content within meat as there would be in seed oil. So it's a pretty like weird argument for them to make that trans fats are terrible and we should be avoiding these foods. But then on the same hand, say like we should eat exclusively meat because like then we'll be getting the same amount of trans fat. Like it doesn't really add up there. But so in a nutshell, those are kind of the three main arguments, Geordie. The first one being the high omega-3, the high omega-6 content, the chemicals involved in the processing, and then the trans fat content. Now, in terms of the arguments and like where all these things are going from, we kind of chatted, you mentioned just before about like the levels of evidence here, right? Like when it comes to science, there's definitely levels to this. Like for sure, it's hard to just like create a scientific paper and get it published, but there are ways to do this. So like in general, the scientific process is very rigorous. You do a study, it has to get checked by other researchers from another institution. They have to clear it. That's called like the peer review system. Then it gets submitted to a a journal, then the journal can say like, okay, this is good quality content, or no, like your research sucks. Maybe you need to change your methods or do something differently. It can go back and forward. It's a very rigorous process. There's a lot involved in terms of getting a paper to be published through like a good quality journal. So this is kind of like one of the ways that we can assess. It's not always super accurate, but it's a good kind of like barrier to entry for getting scientific information across. Usually it has to be cleared by a lot of different scientists from a lot of different places in order to be like, okay, this is some good solid evidence. And then there's even different levels to the studies themselves that get published. Now, on the other side of that, and this is something that definitely happens, and it seems to be like from a lot of the papers that I was reading that were kind of like suggesting these ideas against like seed oils. There are other options when it comes to publishing papers, and so like one of them is using things like open access journals or like less reputable journals. So that whole rigorous process that I talked about, that mainly goes on within like the bigger journals that are more they have like more reputation. But there's other journals that just want to get papers published to kind of like build their own reputation, so they'll kind of let things through. And when you look at a lot of these papers that come out and they say things like omega-6s are like the leading cause of heart disease, or like seed oils are like the like devil's gift to earth, like I don't know, like these like weird claims, they a lot of the time, I'm not saying all the time, like sometimes there are ones that get published in like reputable journals, but a lot of the time these are kind of like fringe papers coming from not so reputable journals that are kind of like promoting these ideas, and then they get cross-published by other papers that then kind of like build on those ideas. And they also are the kind of the papers that get talked about by these people that are then talking to us and like the general public being like, oh my God, seed oils are so bad. Look, there's this study that I found that shows this, without really questioning the level of evidence of that study. So that's kind of like what I wanted to say here is like, this is something that's difficult, like unless you're in the science space, to be able to look at and be like, oh, this paper is like a bit questionable, like, which is why we rely on people to present us with this information. But I think there's a couple of things, and we can talk about this shortly, is like what to look for when people are giving this information to decide ourselves whether or not we can kind of rely on it. So do you want to kind of make a comment about that?
Yeah, and that's really important, right? Because, and this is a big thing in the nutrition space. I think because we all have doctors in our lives, and you know, I experienced it recently, right? Where I had some incidents when I was pushing my body a little too hard and ended up in the emergency, and I relied very heavily on the expertise of the doctors there. And I think we take that expertise, and don't get me wrong, they are fantastic at what they do when it comes to medical science in within that medical community. Nutrition and nutrition science and nutrition research is an entirely different field. And you need to remember that medical doctors do not receive any nutrition training. I have friends who are doctors. I have quite a lot of friends who are doctors. I have friends who are specialists, and they all told me they received two lectures. It's probably changed now since the 10 years I've been at university, but they received two. One lecture on vitamins and one lecture on minerals, and that was it. And that was their nutrition training. So you need to appreciate they don't get the level of training required necessarily. And then a lot of what they do know is postgraduate, or it's out of their own curiosity, which is absolutely fine. What you need to understand though is that we usually use this term, say like scientist or doctor or whatever, and that itself brings a level of reputable source to the general public. Like you hear that and you go, oh yeah, they're reputable. They're reputable. You need to appreciate as well though, not all scientists are great at interpreting research and then communicating that research. And we tend to think that doctors, for whatever reason, are just the entire whole package, that they can do everything. And I'm not throwing shade on doctors. Like if I've got problems with my heart, I'm going to go to a cardiovascular doctor and they're going to be able to help me. Same as if, you know, you got diabetes, you go to a doctor who specializes in that, they will be able to help you. What we tend to see now on social media is a lot of doctors go outside of that scope of expertise. And a lot of them probably aren't that well trained in scientific research. And then on top of that, not trained in scientific nutrition research. And they take all of these, I'd say quarter truths or quarter explorations, I would say, where you have to explore the concept further, and they just take it as a full truth and then they throw it out and people believe it because they've got that MD or they've got some type of qualification as a scientist next to their name. So I think that's something, as someone listening to this and someone consuming information, especially on social media, you need to be very, 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 very aware of.
Mm. Yeah, and I think like a good way to kind of look at that and see, I mean, like it's not always the case that there's like ulterior motives going on here, but as you said, like a lot of these people will kind of rely on their credentials, whether or not it's like a PhD in something completely unrelated or like a doctor's degree, and then kind of take that and run with the prestige that comes with that title, and then just decide that they're an expert on something that's kind of like out of their field. And like one of the benefits, if you look at it, like who's benefiting here, like one of the benefits is they're able to sell a lot of this information, because oftentimes to get to that level in whatever their speciality is, they're obviously got to be pretty switched on, good communicators, all of that kind of stuff. And then they find this weird niche where people are looking for answers. They're unhappy with their how their lives are going. They're looking for a reason, but maybe something to blame. Maybe they're like unhappy with their body or their current health situation. They might have health problems, and they're just unhappy and they're looking for something to blame. And then someone comes along who's they're a doctor or they're a PhD person, and they know the reason that you're obese or the reason that you have this health problem. It's because of insulin, or it's because of like gluten, or in this case, it's because of seed oils. Like it gives someone something to blame, and that's something that they can get behind. And then for that person presenting that information to them, now that's someone who's going to buy off them. There's someone who's going to buy into their personal brand. There's a lot for them to benefit in that situation, which is something you kind of have to think about here. I'm not saying that's like everyone's motive that's in this space. Maybe there are some people who are generally trying to um, help their audience and stuff like that, but it is definitely something that you have to kind of like take a step back and look at who benefits from what they're saying. And another thing here is like when I kind of mentioned there's that whole process of the scientific process, and then maybe some sort of back doors that people can go through. One of the things that we kind of see here is like the people that are presenting these ideas, they should have a level of understanding of these topics where they can start to like sway their other colleagues and other scientists in their sort of like train of thought. So you kind of have to ask yourself, how come they're bringing these ideas to me, who someone who doesn't have that much understanding of science, someone who may be easily influenced? How come they're giving that information to me and trying to sell me stuff, rather than trying to present this information to the scientific community and sway the whole scientific community? Because if their evidence was as good as they say it is, there's a strong chance that the scientific community would be like, oh, wow, like this is something we have to really look into. And then you would see shifts in like the sort of like general health recommendations. Like there's a lot going on behind the scenes in terms of like the scientific process and where all these health recommendations and stuff come from. So a lot of the time it's easier for them with these kind of like fringe views to be like, oh, well, I can't be bothered. Or maybe like the evidence just isn't strong enough, but like I believe in it. So maybe there's like a bit of bias going on, to then rather like maybe they try and convince the other scientists, and the other scientists are like, nah. And they're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go talk to someone who maybe doesn't have as much understanding in this, and then try and convince them. So like, yeah, you kind of have to ask yourself, why are they presenting this information to me rather than trying to like change the scientific consensus? Because oftentimes, as you said, Geordie, when these people are good at communicating, it's easy for them to sway people that don't really understand the topic. But then when they're made to like get into the weeds about what's actually going on, and kind of like dig into the science and stuff, their argument starts to break down a bit. So you won't find them talking as much to actual experts or other experts in their field. Just something to kind of keep in mind, I feel like.
Yeah, and I feel like it's an important point to note here when we talk about nutrition and positive change. When you actively change things about the food that you eat that lead to positive health changes, something you need to be very, very aware of is that you're not just changing the food that you put in your body. What you're doing is you're changing your behaviors. You're changing your behaviors about how you go about putting food in your body. And this is something Dojo and I were talking about off air. It's something I'm going to expand on much more in another episode and another couple social media posts that I have going. And it's the idea that every one of these diets that you see on social media, or every one of these social media personalities that are pretty prominent right now, that are pushing a certain, I wouldn't say agenda, but a certain philosophy about nutrition, every single one of them are saying the exact same thing. They're all saying the exact same thing. If you listen to them and you see what they're pushing, they're all pushing the exact same philosophy. Reduce, if not remove, your processed foods, which is not a bad thing. Everyone will agree with that. Eat mostly whole foods and then live an active lifestyle and get more in touch with, those natural cycles. Get in the light dark cycle. Make sure you get up and you move your body. Make sure that you're doing everything you can to get the best sleep that you can. Make sure that you're managing stress, because we know about the negative impacts that excess cortisol can have. Every single person, whether that is a plant-based advocate, whether that is a ketogenic diet advocate, whether that is a carnivore diet advocate, when you go down to the absolute root of what they're promoting, it's the exact same thing between all of them. And this is where this argument gets interesting, because people like me and Dojo, who don't necessarily fall in any of these camps, we promote the exact same thing. The difference between what me and Dojo promote and everyone else that's, say, a dietitian, nutritionist, or in the nutrition scientific community, is that we don't have a great storyline or a story arc and something that is villainized that makes that interesting, that makes that argument very compelling to the average person. So when me and Dojo say, hey, you know what, you just need to cut out all your processed foods, you need to eat mostly whole food, you still eat a little bit here and there, but make sure you're also getting up and moving your body in a way you like. Go get natural sunlight, make sure that you're doing, some type of stress management, and spend time with your loved ones, because that's really good for you and boosting all these good hormones. You go, yeah, well, duh. Like, okay, obviously. And you go, well, yeah, but that's exactly what they're saying. But they go, no. This guy said seed oils are the problem. And this is where it gets really interesting in terms of storytelling, because ketogenic diets, the villain in their diet is insulin. That's the villain. And then the villain, when we talk about carnivore diets or people in that community, it's seed oils. So like Dojo said, now that person that doesn't want to listen to me or him because we're boring as, they've got this interesting character or this thing that they can blame. Seed oils are the problem to everything that's gone wrong in my life. Insulin, that's the thing that's the problem that's gone wrong. As long as I can fix that, I'm good. And this is where it gets interesting. And when you look at it from an outside perspective, it's blatantly obvious. If you take that person who goes on a ketogenic diet and then they quote unquote control their insulin, it's the exact same thing as what the person on the carnivore diet is doing, the exact same thing as the person on the plant. But what are they doing? Cutting out all of the processed food, eating mostly whole foods. They're sticking to a good regimented diet. They're probably more calorie controlled, more in touch with their body. They're doing everything we promote, but they're attributing all of those beneficial behavior changes to the removal of the villain in their story. So the removal of seed oils, or the control of insulin, or getting rid of, saturated fats from animals, whatever the villain is that whoever is chosen to vilify in that scenario, that's is what gets the credit, not the positive behavior changes. So I think that's very, very important for people to understand here. And it's not like we come out and we're having a go at these. Like, I'm not doing an episode about seed oils because I want to go out and have a go at any particular health practitioner that's promoting it. Because in reality, we're all promoting the same thing. You just need to be very, very aware, because, and I've spoken about this a lot, people tend to get very, very, very passionate when we talk about nutrition and diet, because it forms such a strong part of our identity. When we identify as who we are, a big part of that is the food that we eat. So a lot of people, that's why you see people really, really passionate about being vegan, really, really passionate about following a carnivore diet or plant-based or paleo, whatever it is, because it forms our identity. And as part of that, that kind of builds up and contributes this huge amount of dislike or hate towards whatever is vilified in that little community that you're in. And that's why people are so passionate about, seed oils are the absolute problem. It's no saturated fat. No, you should stop eating that. Whatever it is, that is why. And really, when you get, I don't want to say true scientists, but when you get people who can step back and look at the entirety of the situation, I won't say it's comical, but it is somewhat jocular when you look at it and you go, you guys are all arguing about the exact same thing. You're all saying the exact same thing, but you've just fell into this storyline where you've all picked a different villain to hate, and you've all picked a certain storyline that you want to jump on. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if someone follows carnivore. If they positively change their health and their life for it, that's great. That's what we're all getting into this for. That's what we're all doing this for. The problem with social media, when we're presenting a certain storyline that's worked for us, is that's not how it works when we look at the population. And that's what me and Dojo, that's the That's the area that we play in. That's the arena we have to fight in, is the population. So when we go out and we say things, we have to make sure that what we're saying is best for the majority of the population of people listening, not just the people who have consigned themselves to these little camps where they pick a villain and they go fight everyone else, even though they're all doing the same thing. That's why our story and our message that we put out with, along with all the other health practitioners, all the other dietitians, the nutrition research, why it's so boring, because we can't vilify one thing, because we know, as best the evidence, really it's not that one thing. You could do it any which way. You just got to get these behaviors and get that right. But the fact of the matter is, it's just boring and no one wants to listen to that. That's all it is.
Yeah, honestly, that's a really good way to summarize it all. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think let's wrap it up there. Again, we spoke about seed oils in this, but really we're talking about a bigger issue here. You could do this podcast on anything. We could do it on the insulin weight loss model and talk about that and whatever, and talk about keto. We're kind of, no, I wouldn't say we're picking on. I think we're just presenting the information about seed oils and people in the carnivore space. And don't get me wrong, like it, and obviously everyone's gonna sit here and be like, oh, they're bashing carnivore. I actually like a lot of the philosophies of what carnivore MD does. I like him in the way that he talks about a lot of these processes and how he gets people in to make those positive behavior change. I don't necessarily agree with some of the science he talks about. I think he overreaches a lot of the mechanisms that we just do not have. A lot of the cannabinoid system, for example, what he talks about, I know for a fact I have, obviously CBD is such a prominent thing in the combat sports space. And I am very, very fortunate to be connected with a lot of very smart people and scientists who specifically have PhDs in that area. I know we're just not there to make the comments that he makes about those things. But you know what? It's just having the sense and the mind to be able to be like, okay, well, let's step back and let's look at it for what it is. Carnivore MD does probably a lot of great work. A lot of great work, helps a lot of people. And on a business side, I can absolutely respect, like what Dojo said, on the business side, he's selling something, he's doing that very well. You just have to, and I'm going to call it a moral and ethical backbone that me and Dojo have to abide to. You have to step back and be like, okay, we have to appreciate that's not going to apply to everyone. In the game we play, we're playing for the masses and we want to help everyone. So we are very constricted to what we have to say. And unfortunately, we can't have the villain in our story. We just have to put out the boring story of what we know works.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of like it at the end of the day, is the boring stuff, unfortunately, is what works. Same as jiu-jitsu, same as combat sports, same as life. Like fundamentals is always the most important, but everyone kind of wants to skip over it and get onto the fun stuff. So yeah, that's probably a good place to leave it, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good episode. If you guys are listening to this, let us know what you think. If you guys think we're completely wrong, let us know. I'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts about it, and I'd love to talk to you about it more. Shoot us a message, let us know. But give us some feedback. What do you guys think of the episode? What do you think of seed oils? What do you think of insulin? Any of these things? What diet camp you're in? Just let us know. I'd love to have more of these conversations and dig deeper and just expand your thought process. So hopefully you can step back and see the bigger picture. But let's leave that one there, Dojo.
Easy. All right, catch you, Jordy.
And there it is, another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. If you like this episode and you enjoy our content, then you'll absolutely love our new TFD Performance Hub. Our first course on the hub is the Performance Nutrition for BJJ course, which is perfect for grapplers looking to master their nutrition. And if you follow the link in the description, you can even snag 40% off that course. This podcast will be available through the podcast app, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and if you follow along our socials at @the_fight_dietitian, you see all of the best bits from our podcast episodes. Thanks for listening in, and I'll see you guys for the next episode of the TFD Performance Podcast.